Openings in anime can often be the easiest way of completely predicting the plot itself. No, I'm completely serious. While some shows may hide things from the viewer with their openings, in essence just making them fun openings, others may choose to leave small references or symbolism in the opening to make the OP that much more meaningful upon a rewatch. And I mean, hey, why not? If you can add small details, that'll be cool after watching the anime, and it makes the opening just that much cooler, or at least that's usually the case. You see, in my case, I've been able to use the music and the OP itself to completely spoil anime, meaning I see any plot twists coming long before they ever come along. I began doing this after realizing that OPs would often leave these hints, and whether I like it or not, I can no longer stop. Even if I try and turn my brain off, I will immediately begin connecting pieces in the opening, and at some point I will have the whole plot figured out. One such case is with the anime Future Diary and its opening. Now, I've realized since my first video that this series is really divisive among people, with the only two opinions in the community being either that you love Future Diary with a passion, or hate that it exists to begin with. It's certainly not the only series with this problem, but regardless, it blows me away that there aren't any more neutral parties in these situations. Well, if you want my opinion, I enjoyed it. I recognize its flaws, but I really enjoyed the show. Let's get off that topic now, because whenever I say my opinions on the show, I literally divide the room, and that's for another day. Regardless, we're here to talk about its OP, which I think most people can agree is a pretty solid opening overall. Sadly, at least for me, I was able to connect the dots it left and spoil the entire plot for myself. I'm assuming since you're here, you want to know what managed to do this for me. So let's dive right into this fantastic opening and show the several signs it left behind to try and spoil the viewer early. Firstly, we start on a scene with a bleeding eye that I would likely say belongs to Yuno herself. In the background, it flashes through several scenes, starting with a cloudy sky that should immediately warn you of the show's darker tone. It then transitions to mosaic windows, specifically the ones that would be used in a church, hinting at the general godly focus of the show, but it also has an interesting aspect as well. Since it appears in the same scene as Yuno, it should be a small piece of evidence that not only does Yuno already have the godly powers, but that she's not too thrilled about this whole setup to begin with. To be fair, you might not immediately be able to gather the truth yet, but connecting this with the other parts will slowly begin to unravel the full story. The room and the city themselves aren't hugely important until considering the scene that comes directly after, which showcases a bunch of moving gears. You'll notice that typically, gears are used heavily in shows involving time travel, and are literally an immediate sign that time travel will be involved in some capacity. So, showcasing these scenes together, it's meant to imply that not only is time travel involved, but considering it's Yuno's eye seeing all of this, she's not only the only one aware of the time travel, but she's seen this stuff already. Almost like she's in another timeline. Huh, interesting. Just as the scene ends, water is shown flowing, which might be representative of Yuno's mental shift over the course of time, because the fact that she's in the water in some regards implies a baptism, or a changing of person. It's just that, unlike the general implied positivity of baptism, this one is for the worse in her case, not the better. The title drops, and tons of blood flies across the screen. This one's not really as deep, and is more meant as a way of conveying that yes, there will be quite a bit of death in this series. Though it could also be representative of all the blood already spilled during the first instance of the games, and the survive could be there to represent Yuno's drive to survive the next game to be with Yuki, but I don't completely know if that's the case. As the scene transitions, several Roman gods' names are sung out. The show is almost immediately trying to not only hammer in the godly connection that the show has, especially considering the game's goal is to find someone to be the new god, but also considering that this literally jumped from Yuno to this, it also may be one of the more subtle hints that Yuno is already a god, and considering that the song is likely being sung from Yuno's perspective, it makes the connection even more interesting. We'll get into that aspect later though, because we have more to move on to. During these scenes, the third's knife is shown right before dissolving into blood, which should immediately warn you that not only will the third lose almost right away, but that anything representing someone dying later means that they will eventually do so. Trust me, this will become extremely important later, so keep it in mind. The fourth's revolver is also shown in the next scene before firing and becoming inactive. This should signal the viewer that not only will he likely end up dying, but the fact that he fires a shot should immediately make him a bit more suspicious. Even more suspicion would be cast on other characters later, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Regardless, the words dead end popping up right after this scene should be enough to hint that yes, these two will die regardless. After the words happy end are shown, it transitions to Yuno from a distance, who looks almost immediately ominous. The happy end is obviously supposed to connect to Yuno, but considering the way she looks, it should tip the viewer off to the fact that maybe something is a bit off about Yuno. Also, I didn't mention this, but right after happy end, the words Deus Ex Machina pop up for a split second, and then Yuno appears. So they're not only cutting off the happy end, but they're cutting it away from Yuno. In essence, Yuno wants a happy end, but ends up taking over Deus Ex Machina's position as god, thereby making it so her real happy end is no longer possible. She is no longer able to attain it, and yet in the next scene, her demeanor reveals something different about her. With the ominous red skies behind her, and the fact that she has a very devious looking smile, it should make it obvious that Yuno already has something planned. Her eyes are shadowed out as well, which is a commonly used technique to showcase that a character is hiding something, perhaps something very important. Also remember that the moment this scene begins, the music changes tone completely. It now sounds lower, slower, and more devious and unsettling. Though one may immediately assume this segment is just used to represent Yuno's insane obsession with Yuki, I'd argue the way the music plays out and the way the scene progresses should be an immediate sign that yes, Yuno is hiding something big, not only from Yuki and the others, but from the viewer themselves. As the scene progresses, the vocals and the music amp up a ton as Deus Ex Machina is shown, which transitions to Murmur showing off the connections between the two. Notice that Murmur chains the background up right before the scene transitions to Yuki, almost trying to hint at the fact that Murmur will not let Yuki win. Now, what I find most interesting is that the next two scenes with Yuki and Yuno connect so well. Notice the difference in the scenes. Yuki is shown looking forlorn and then literally cracks, similar to how his personality and mental state literally break over the course of the series. He's no longer the same lame diary-reading kid that he started as, and he breaks and becomes a full cold-blooded killer. Notice that, however, Yuki doesn't die, he only breaks. Sure, mentally he's not fantastic, but he's still alive. You know who does die in the very next clip? Yuno. Literally, it's not even subtle. She vanishes in the same method that people vanish when their diary is destroyed. Every character in the OP that gets a reference like this dies at some point in the OP, with the exception of Murmur, Deus, the ninth who has some added significance later, and you guessed it, Yuki. Right here it's showing you that despite Yuno's plans, Yuki will be the true winner in the end. It literally spoils the direct end of the series in this one clip. Next, the puppets of the fifth are shown falling apart, dripping with blood. This will not only immediately clue the viewer in on the fact that the user of these puppets is a diary holder, but that he will also inevitably lose the game. Next is the sixth ball, which eventually begins falling apart into a puddle of blood, which obviously signifies her loss as well, but will clue the viewer in on her intentions. Considering the way it literally falls apart, it could be representative of her already decayed mind during the games, and like everyone else in the OP, should seem suspicious immediately. The next couple of scenes get even more interesting, considering not only the use of the visuals, but the lyrics in the track as well. I need to go over the general tone of the song itself, as I've avoided mentioning it for a fair chunk of time. The lyrics, at least in the way they are written, as far as translations go, almost seem to be written from the perspective of Yuno, but specifically her insanity-filled version from the first world. The lyrics' general tone not only sounds uncomfortable, as would be expected from an opening of this type of anime, but the wording is very odd, almost knowing, to be honest. That would fit Yuno's general situation as well, because this Yuno in specific already had gone through the first competition and had attained the title of God in the First World. These lyrics, when combined with the already discussed visuals of the opening, should immediately showcase that Yuno is indeed hiding something darker. Even disregarding the lyrics, because not everybody will see the translation, the music's tone almost always becomes more devious in tone whenever Yuno's on screen, and it attempts to constantly paint Yuno in a more suspicious light. Surprisingly, this comes into full effect in the next couple of scenes. As the first scene plays, we see two hands slowly connecting before resting upon each other. It's almost immediately obvious that this is supposed to symbolize the two joining, or in a more basic sense, sex. Considering the amount of times Yuno mentions that she will eventually do this with Yuki, showcasing it in the opening would usually represent the eventuality of this scene itself, and one would assume it would be a positive message. Well, unless you're really obsessed with Yuno or really hate Yuki, in which case I'd imagine this scene might bother you a lot. Where the scene loses all of its positivity is when the next scene begins. Considering it not only uses the same style, but the same setting as well, it should be pretty obvious that these two scenes are meant to connect. Notice, however, that not only is only one person walking, but there's no other footsteps created by anyone else in the room. Jumping from 2 people to 1 should already be suspicious enough, but the fact that there's what I'd assume to be blood coating the ground after the footsteps, it's used to show that someone has just died, and considering the borderline nonchalant walk, it's obvious that this event really wasn't that big of a deal. If you want even more evidence that this takes place directly after the sex, not only does this angle imply that the person is likely unclothed at the moment, but the lack of shoes at the very least should be enough to place these two scenes back to back. This may lead the viewer to wonder who the survivor is, but the opening has already gone through painstaking effort to make Yuno look as suspicious as humanly possible. So, in just this one scene, it already illustrates that directly after sex, someone is going to either die or get pretty close to death. And considering the context from the rest of the opening, it should be obvious that it would be Yuno who would survive. Also, the lyrics literally showcase the parallel between the transitions, from let's become one to let's survive, which could be showcasing Yuno having sex with Yuki and then planning on killing him so she can survive to see him again. Next up is the knife and the comb, likely owned by the couple holding the 7th diary. Considering that not only are they held by no one at all, but they're also on the ground, it implies that the two of them will eventually meet their demise at the hands of Yuki and Yuno. Next is the pile of skulls surrounded by a much larger skull. Considering the only diary holder known to utilize multiple diaries under a server is the 8th, and that it's pretty obvious that the chef hat is present on the much larger skull in the middle, it's obvious that this is representative of the 8th, and the skull should be an obvious representative of their eventual fate. Interestingly enough, the 9th is shown next, who, instead of being shown in a way that would predict her death, she is shown standing directly in front of Deus before tossing her eye patch away. The opening isn't even being subtle here. You show her in the same frame as the god, and then she sheds her eye patch, representing her past self, and begins her transformation into the more powerful version seen in the ending of the show. Next we get a quick glimpse of a petrified and certainly dead dog, representing the 10th, who utilized dogs for a majority of his short time in the show. Why it couldn't be his skull instead of this poor dog's is anyone's guess, but the show just wanted to make a connection, I guess. Next it showcases the glasses that likely belong to the 11th, which is an interestingly specific thing to use as an identifier, but to be fair, the character isn't really shown for quite a large chunk of time, so revealing something like him being the mayor in this short of a span of time would be almost impossible without leaving some kind of blatantly obvious note. Finally, for a literal couple of frames, you see the 12th and his odd costume. It goes by so quickly that honestly it'd be pretty difficult to notice upon the first watch, but it's still pretty interesting they chose to showcase him. Also, notice that this opening actually goes in numerical order for each of the extra diary owners that aren't Yuno or Yuki, transitioning from the 3rd's knife, to the 4th's gun, to the 5th's puppets, to the 6th ball, to the 7th's knife and comb, to the 8th's skull, to the 9th on the platform, to the 10th with the dog, to the 11th with the glasses, and finally a quick flash to end it all off with the 12th. It's actually kind of a cool minor detail I noticed literally while finishing up this script, and felt like I needed to mention it. A hand is shown transforming into a knife, which ends up stabbing into someone as indicated by the blood splatter. Though this may be a confusing transition at first, and the viewer may initially wonder who this was happening to, it's quickly revealed when 2 Yunos begin fighting each other before one combines with the other to create one Yuno. Anyone who's watched the show might realize that this is likely representing the moment when Yuno traveled into a separate universe and killed the Yuno from that universe. After getting rid of that Yuno, this Yuno took over the real Yuno of that world, and just when you wonder whether the disguise will work or not, Yuno reaches upward only to be saved by a hand, one that is most definitely Yuki himself. Her plan has worked perfectly, and she's managed to become the Yuno of that world, fooling everyone in the process. The framing of the scene also, however, adds one more bit of spoilery goodness to the mix. Notice that this is the first time in the entire OP that the art takes a more pleasant tone with full color. It's meant to showcase the fact that, regardless of what the ending may seem like, there will be a good ending reached at the end. And one does just so happen to come along in the OVA itself. Huh, funny how the direct ending of the OP also mimics the exact ending of the series itself. These kinds of openings are the ones that I think leave a lasting impact because of the amount of secrets and details they leave behind. Sure, I managed to predict the plot because of the OP itself, but that doesn't mean that I don't love it. Contrary to that, I actually think it's one of my favorites. The pure level of detail and thought put into this OP is almost mind-blowing, and making this video has been a genuinely amazing experience. I had seen some of these details, but there were several more I only noticed upon re-examining the opening for this video. That's just how well crafted the OP is. Heck, I might have even missed something. If I did, be sure to add to the conversation in the comments below, because this stuff is really cool. Regardless, I hope that whether you love or hate Future Diary, we can at least agree that the OP isn't just really catchy and gorgeous, but it's one of the most well thought out openings in anime. Or feel free to disagree, that's fine. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video, because it was so much fun to make.